Thunderbird is a mythological bird-like spirit in North American indigenous cultures. It is described as a supernatural being of power and strength. It appears across many oral histories, songs, and artworks, especially in Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but also in the American Southwest, the East Coast, the Great Lakes region, and the Great Plains. The Thunderbird is said to create thunder by flapping its wings in Algonquian traditions, and to create lightning by flashing its eyes in Algonquian and Iroquois traditions. It is commonly described as a bird of prey or a hybrid of human and bird forms. It is often seen as a protector of humans, but demands respect, offerings, prayers, and gifts in return. Archaeological evidence shows Thunderbird depictions in sites that are up to 4,000 years old, including petroglyphs near Twin Bluffs in Wisconsin, dating from about 250 BCE to 1500 CE. In many Pacific Coast traditions, there are stories of battles between the Thunderbird and the whale, and some researchers have linked these stories to the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake in the year 1700 and the resulting tsunami that reached Japan. In Algonquian and related traditions, including Mississaugas, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and other tribes, the Thunderbird motif is widespread, especially around the Great Lakes and northeastern regions of North America, including Ojibwe and other Algonquian-speaking peoples in Canada and the northern United States. In Algonquian mythology, the Thunderbird controls the upper world while the underworld is controlled by beings such as the underwater panther or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird creates thunder and throws lightning bolts at these underworld beings. In Ojibwe tradition, the Thunderbird was created by Nana Basso to fight underwater spirits. It also punishes humans who break moral rules. It is said to live in the four directions and migrate with other birds in spring, then leave in fall after the dangerous season of underwater spirits passes. In Menominee tradition, Thunderbirds live on a floating mountain in the far west sky. They control rain and hail, they enjoy fighting, and they constantly battle the great horned serpents, known as Missy-Kenubik, to protect humanity. They are also described as messengers of the great sun. In Ho-Chunk tradition, a person who has a vision of a Thunderbird during a solitary fast may become a war chief. In Arikara tradition, a story describes a boy who finds a nest of young Thunderbirds and is warned about a two-headed serpent that comes from a lake to eat them. In Siouan-speaking traditions, the Thunderbird motif also appears, including among tribes near the Great Lakes. And among the Sioux, the Thunderbird is a protector against dangerous reptilian beings called Unkahila. Some Plains tribes, such as the Arapaho, associate Thunderbirds with the summer season, while other symbolic figures represent winter. In Gros Ventre traditions, the Thunderbird is said to have given the sacred pipe to the people. In Shawnee traditions, Thunderbirds may appear in human form and are sometimes identified by unusual behavior, such as speaking in reverse. Thunderbirds are often described as extremely large, sometimes capable of lifting whales in their talons with bright feathers, sharp claws, and teeth. In some traditions, they are said to live in clouds above mountains and are both feared and respected across many cultures. Some stories describe them as shapeshifters or beings that can interact directly with humans, sometimes as children or human-like forms. Their anger is considered dangerous, and in some traditions, entire villages could be punished or transformed for wrongdoing. Iconography of the Thunderbird often includes an X-shaped form in Algonquian art, where the wings are spread horizontally and the head faces forward. This creates an abstract X symbol used in carvings and petroglyphs. Examples of this style appear in Ojibwe artifacts, including medallions dating to around 1250 to 1400 CE, and in 18th century manuscript drawings where the Thunderbird ranges from detailed bird figures to simple X marks. The Thunderbird symbol is widely found in totem poles, pottery, masks, jewelry, carvings, and petroglyphs, and continues to be represented in oral storytelling and ceremonial traditions across many indigenous cultures. The horned serpent is usually described as a massive snake-like being with horns, antlers, or a glowing crest. It is often connected to rivers, lakes, caves, storms, and the underworld. Unlike dragons or evil serpents in European traditions, the horned serpent is not purely good or evil. Depending on the tribe and story, it can be a guardian, a destroyer, a spiritual guide, or a test of human courage and wisdom. Among the Muskogee, the horned serpent is known alongside another serpent creature called the tie snake. Some traditions treat them as the same being, while others describe them as separate creatures. The horned serpent is said to live underwater and is covered with shining crystalline scales with a large crystal embedded in its forehead. These scales and crystals were valued for powers of divination and spiritual sight, while the horns were used in medicine. One Muskogee informant described the creature as a water serpent with stag-like horns that was not evil and did not attack humans, but possessed a strange magnetic influence over animals and game. Stories also mention the horned serpent eating sumac plants. The Alabama people called the horned serpent Chinto sect ko, or crawfish snake, and divided it into 4 types based on horn colors: blue, red, white, and yellow. The Yuchi people continued creating ceremonial horned serpent effigies into the early 1900s, using stuffed deer hide painted blue with yellow antlers. Their big turtle dance honored the spirit of the horned serpent and connected it with thunder, storms, lightning, rainbows, and disease. Among the Cherokee, the horned serpent is known as Uktena, meaning powerful snake. Uktena is one of the most feared and respected creatures in Cherokee mythology. It is described as being as large around as a tree trunk, covered in glowing scales with rings of color across its body, with horns on its head and a blazing crystal called the Alansuti set into its forehead. The crystal was believed to grant visions, healing powers, wisdom, and supernatural abilities to anyone who could obtain it. But approaching Uktena was considered extremely dangerous. Its glowing crest could hypnotize people and draw them toward the serpent instead of allowing them to flee. Its breath was described as deadly and poisonous, capable of killing any living thing that inhaled it. Cherokee stories claim that even seeing Uktena asleep could bring death upon a person's family. According to legend, the only way to kill Uktena was to strike the 7th spot from its head, where its heart was hidden beneath the scales. In Sioux traditions, the horned serpent appears as the Unshigila, ancient reptilian water monsters of many forms. According to their stories, the Thunderbirds eventually destroyed most of these creatures, leaving behind only smaller reptiles like snakes and lizards. Some researchers believe these legends may have been influenced by the discovery of dinosaur fossils and ancient reptile remains within Sioux lands, while Thunderbird stories may have connections to discoveries of large flying reptile fossils. In Ojibwe and Anishinaabe traditions, the horned serpent appears in the form of Mishapeshu, the underwater panther. Mishapeshu combines traits of a serpent, a great cat, and a horned spirit creature. It lives in deep waters such as Lake Superior and guards sacred copper deposits beneath the lakes. Mishipeshu controls storms and currents, punishes disrespect toward nature, and protects spiritual places hidden beneath the waters. Shamans and spiritual leaders sometimes sought visions from Mishipeshu for protection and knowledge, but disrespect toward the spirit could result in shipwrecks, illness, or spiritual punishment. In Choctaw and Creek traditions, stories often describe battles between thunderbirds and horned serpents. These conflicts symbolized cosmic balance rather than simple good versus evil. The thunderbird represented sky, fire, storms, and order, while the horned serpent represented water, earth, chaos, and the underworld. Together, they reflected the belief that opposing forces maintained balance within the universe. Across many cultures, the horned serpent symbolized transformation and rebirth because snakes shed their skin. It was also associated with hidden knowledge, healing, visions, and dangerous spiritual power. Encounters with serpents in dreams or visions could serve as warnings about imbalance or signs that purification rituals were needed. The creature was deeply tied to sacred geography, especially rivers, springs, lakes, caves, and underground places believed to connect the human world with the spirit world. Archaeologists have uncovered horned serpent imagery across North America in petroglyphs, pottery, shell carvings, beadwork, and ceremonial artifacts. Sites such as the Etowah Mounds in Georgia and the Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma contain important serpent imagery connected to ritual life. During the Mississippian period, from around 900 to 1500 CE, the horned serpent formed part of a sacred cosmic triad, alongside great birds and feline predators. These images were not simple decorations. They were sacred symbols tied to cosmology, spiritual teachings, ceremonies, and oral tradition. Even after colonization, forced relocation, and suppression of indigenous religion, the horned serpent continues to exist within native storytelling, ceremonies, dances, art, literature, and modern cultural identity. For many indigenous peoples, the horned serpent is not merely an old myth but a living spiritual presence connected to the land, the waters, and the unseen world. The Wendigo is a creature and evil spirit originating from the folklore of several Algonquian-speaking indigenous peoples, including the Ojibwe, Cree, Saulteaux, Naskapi, and Innu. The Wendigo is most strongly associated with winter, starvation, greed, cannibalism, isolation, and the supernatural dangers of imbalance within human nature. Across different traditions, the Wendigo is described as a malevolent spirit, a monstrous humanoid creature, or a force capable of possessing human beings and driving them into madness and cannibalism. The modern English word Wendigo comes from Algonquian languages, including Cree and Ojibwe, with similar spellings appearing in English records as early as the 1700s. In traditional Algonquian beliefs, the Wendigo was never simply a monster story. It was deeply connected to survival, morality, social order, and the dangers created by greed and starvation during harsh northern winters. The Wendigo is commonly described as gaunt, skeletal, and emaciated, with gray, dead-looking skin stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes are sunken deep into its skull, its lips torn and bloody, and its body emits the smell of decay, death, and rotting flesh. In some stories, the creature is a giant many times larger than a human being, especially in Ojibwe, Cree, Naskapi, and Innu traditions. A Wendigo is said to possess an endless hunger for human flesh. Every time it consumes another person, it grows larger, but it can never become full, meaning it is trapped forever between starvation and gluttony. The Wendigo represents more than physical hunger. In many indigenous traditions, it symbolizes greed, selfishness, excess, imbalance, and the destruction caused when humans abandon morality and community. A person could become a Wendigo by resorting to cannibalism during famine, by becoming consumed by greed, or by prolonged contact with the spirit itself. Some stories describe the Wendigo as capable of speech, reasoning, and deception, while others portray it as a savage predator driven only by hunger. One traditional Ojibwe story told by Lottie Chikokwo Marston describes a giant Wendigo kidnapping a young boy and carrying him across the wilderness while waiting for him to grow fat enough to eat. The Wendigo repeatedly cuts the boy's hand with a knife to check whether he has gained weight. Eventually, the boy reaches a village and warns the people. The villagers attack the Wendigo and cut off its legs, but the creature survives by eating the marrow from its own bones. Only after being completely dismembered is the Wendigo finally destroyed. Stories like this emphasize the creature's unnatural endurance and endless appetite. In some Algonquian communities, ceremonial dances were performed during famines to warn against Wendigo behavior and reinforce social unity during desperate times. One ceremony known as Wendigo Kanzuen involves masked dancers moving backward around drums. These rituals reminded people of the dangers of selfishness and cannibalism during periods of starvation and extreme winter hardship. The concept of Wendigo psychosis emerged from historical accounts describing people believed to be possessed by the Wendigo spirit. These individuals reportedly developed an uncontrollable craving for human flesh, fear of becoming cannibals, violent behavior, depression, or madness. Jesuit records from 1661 describe cases among northern indigenous peoples in which afflicted individuals hunted and devoured other humans with what observers described as more than animal hunger. In some traditions, the only solution was execution to prevent further killings, though Cree stories also describe attempted cures involving animal fat or grease, with victims supposedly vomiting ice during recovery. One of the most famous historical cases involved a Plains Cree trapper named Swift Runner in Alberta during the winter of 1878. Despite being within traveling distance of emergency food supplies, Swift Runner murdered and consumed his wife and children. Authorities later interpreted the case as an example of Wendigo psychosis rather than simple starvation cannibalism. Another famous figure was Jack Fiddler, an Oji Cree chief and medicine man who claimed to kill individuals believed to be transforming into Wendigos. In 1907, he and his brother were arrested by Canadian authorities for homicide connected to those killings. During the 20th century, scholars debated whether Wendigo psychosis was a genuine psychological condition or a misunderstanding created by outsiders interpreting indigenous beliefs through Western psychiatry. Some researchers argued it was a culture-bound syndrome tied to starvation trauma and spiritual beliefs, while others believed the disorder had been exaggerated or misrepresented by anthropologists and psychiatrists. The ICD-10 later classified Wendigo as a culture-specific disorder involving cannibalistic obsession, though the legitimacy of the diagnosis remains controversial. Beyond the creature itself, many indigenous writers and scholars use the Wendigo symbolically. The Wendigo can represent destructive greed, uncontrolled consumption, colonialism, environmental destruction, and social imbalance. Ojibwe scholar Brady DeSanti described the Wendigo as a marker of a person spiritually and socially out of balance with their community and the natural world. Author Louise Erdrich used a concept in her novel The Round House to portray a violent criminal whose actions threatened the safety of an indigenous community. Other scholars have interpreted the Wendigo as a metaphor for colonial expansion, manifest destiny, and systems that consume land, people, and resources without limit. Modern interpretations often reduce the Wendigo into a generic horror monster, but in traditional Algonquian teachings, it was a warning about the dangers of isolation, selfishness, excess, famine, and abandoning responsibility toward others. The Wendigo embodied winter itself, endless hunger, and the collapse of humanity into violent greed. Even today, the figure remains one of the most recognizable and powerful beings in North American mythology, continuing to appear in storytelling, literature, film, art, and discussions about morality, balance, and survival. The Pukwudgie is a small human-like creature from the folklore of the Wampanoag people and other indigenous traditions in parts of the northeastern United States and eastern Canada, especially Massachusetts, Delaware, Indiana, and Prince Edward Island. The name has appeared in several spellings, which has been translated as Little Wild Man of the Woods That Vanishes. Pukwudgies are often described as supernatural forest beings connected to magic, mischief, and danger. In most descriptions, Pukwudgies stand only 2 to 3 feet tall, sometimes no higher than a person's knee. They are said to have gray, smooth skin, large ears, exaggerated noses, and a strange appearance that combines human and animal features. One of their most recognizable traits is a row of sharp porcupine-like quills running from the tops of their heads down their backs. Because of these quills, a person approaching from behind might mistake a Pukwudgie for a porcupine before realizing it is standing upright. Pukwudgies are said to possess powerful magical abilities. They can appear and disappear at will, turn invisible, shapeshift into other forms, create fire, and use magic against humans. Some traditions describe them carrying poisoned arrows, knives, and spears. They are also said to throw sand into the eyes of victims to blind them before attacking. According to legend, Pukwudgies enjoy causing trouble for humans and may follow people for long periods to simply torment them, with the end goal usually being the victim commits suicide. They have been blamed for kidnappings, disappearances, pushing people from cliffs, and luring travelers deep into dangerous wilderness areas where they die. In older traditions, Pukwudgies were not always hostile toward humans. Native American stories describe them as once being friendly and helpful, but eventually turning against humanity. One of the most important legends explaining this change involves the giant culture hero, Maushop, and his wife, Granny Squannet. Maushop was a powerful giant connected to creation stories and the shaping of the land. According to the legend, the Pukwudgies became jealous of the love and admiration humans gave to Maushop. Feeling ignored and unappreciated, they turned bitter and began tormenting people. The humans eventually asked Maushop and Granny Squannet for help. In response, Maushop used his immense power to fling the Pukwudgies away from their homeland into distant regions such as the Great Lakes area, which explains why stories about them spread into places like Indiana, But exile did not end the conflict. Some versions of the story claim the Pukwudgies returned, seeking revenge against both humans and Maushop himself. In these stories, Maushop sent his sons to stop them, but the Pukwudgies killed all 5 sons. Other versions claim they eventually killed Maushop or Granny Squannet as well. Because of these stories, Pukwudgies became feared as dangerous and malicious beings that should never be approached. Many legends warn that acknowledging one, insulting one, or drawing its attention can lead to years of torment or death. Their hostility toward humans is often portrayed as permanent, fueled by resentment, jealousy, and revenge. They will even kill pets and entire families just to get revenge on you, or just do it simply for their enjoyment, because there's nothing you can do to stop them. Some modern interpretations compare Pukwudgies to fairies, goblins, or cryptids because of their small size, magical powers, and connection to forests and hidden places. Unlike many European fairy traditions, however, Pukwudgies are usually treated as genuinely dangerous rather than playful tricksters. They are viewed as unpredictable wilderness spirits that exist between the natural and supernatural worlds. Today, the Pukwudgie remains one of the most recognizable creatures in Wampanoag folklore and regional northeastern legends. Stories about them continue to appear in oral traditions, local ghost stories, books, films, and modern cryptid discussions. Despite modern adaptations, the traditional warning remains consistent across many stories. If someone encounters a Pukwudgie in the woods, the safest thing to do is leave immediately and avoid attracting its attention. The Averasboro Gallinipper is a legendary giant mosquito creature from the folklore of North Carolina, especially connected to the old town of Averasboro and the swamps along the Cape Fear River. According to the stories, the Gallinipper was an enormous blood-sucking insect, said to be as large as a hawk, with a stinger so massive and sharp it could pierce completely through a man's arm. Legends claimed that a single bite from the creature could drain all the blood from a human being in one gulp, leaving death almost instantly. Among the lumbermen and swamp workers of coastal North Carolina, the Gallinipper was feared more than alligators, bears, or panthers, hiding in the forests. Workers cutting timber along the swamps and riverbanks were said to constantly watch the skies and marshes for signs of the giant insects. The legend became especially tied to the abandoned port town of Averasboro, although similar stories spread across many coastal communities, including Bath, the oldest town in North Carolina. One of the most famous accounts connected to the legend comes from the 19th century. According to stories recorded in Monsters of North Carolina by John Hare, one tavern in Averasboro displayed a strange skeleton hanging from its ceiling. The skeleton appeared to belong to a large bird, possibly a tundra swan, but someone had replaced the beak with a long, sharpened bone carved into the shape of a giant needle or stinger. Hanging beneath the skeleton was a sign reading, Averasboro Gallinipper. The display served as a warning and a joke, referencing stories of gigantic mosquitoes so large that people supposedly mistook them for flying birds. The roots of the Gallinipper legend stretch much further back into Native American oral tradition. The Tuscarora people, an Iroquois nation that migrated south into North Carolina around 500 CE, told stories about a monstrous mosquito creature called Ro-Te-Yo. Tuscarora chief Elias Johnson, who recorded tribal traditions during the 19th century, described Ro-Te-Yo as a mosquito as large as a man, with enormous wings that produced a loud roaring sound while flying. The creature had a giant stinger and killed anyone it landed upon by sucking out all their blood. According to the stories, many warriors died trying to destroy the creature, but eventually a hero managed to pierce its heart with an arrow. When the monster died, its body released countless tiny mosquitoes into the world, creating the smaller insects known today. The Cherokee of North Carolina told a very similar story, though in their tradition, the creature was not a mosquito, but a gigantic yellow jacket wasp called Ulag, meaning the boss. This massive insect was said to be large enough to carry children away to its nest. According to Cherokee legend, the creature lived in a cave in western North Carolina called Tuganunyi, translated as where the yellow jacket was. Hunters eventually surrounded the cave with fires and smoke, suffocating the giant insect along with many smaller ones. However, countless smaller yellow jackets escaped and spread across the world afterward, explaining the existence of modern stinging insects. Both the Tuscarora and Cherokee versions share the same mythological structure. A giant supernatural insect terrorizes humanity until it is finally destroyed, but from its death countless smaller insects emerge and spread everywhere. These stories likely served both as explanations for the existence of mosquitoes and stinging insects and as warnings about the dangers hidden in the swamps and forests of the southeastern wilderness. The Gallinipper itself eventually became part of Southern American folklore, blending native traditions with lumber camp stories, tavern stories, and exaggeration by lumberjacks who wanted to impress not only their fellow man, but mainly the women. Though modern science recognizes a real species of large mosquito, sometimes nicknamed the Gallinipper, the legendary creature of North Carolina folklore remains far more terrifying, a monstrous blood-drinking insect feared in the dark swamps long before modern horror stories existed. The Yeitso was one of the greatest and most terrifying monsters in Navajo mythology. His name translates to Big Monster, and he was considered the largest and most feared of the Anai, sometimes called the alien gods or enemy monsters that threatened humanity in the early age of the world. Yeitso was eventually defeated by the famous Navajo hero twins, Nyanezgani and Pukwudgies, who traveled across the land destroying monsters that preyed upon mankind. Different traditions describe Yeitso's origins differently. In one version, he was the eldest son of the sun god, Sanawai. In another version, he was born unnaturally after a frustrated Navajo woman performed forbidden acts involving a stone, making the stone his father. Regardless of his origin, Yeitso became the leader of the Ane and one of the greatest threats to the Navajo people. Yeitso's appearance was monstrous and unnatural. He was described as a colossal creature resembling a giant elk or gazelle without a head in the normal human sense, with a massive body covered in thick flint scales sharp as stone knives. His enormous size was his defining trait. Stories claimed that a single stride from Yeitso covered the distance an ordinary man could walk between sunrise and noon. His body was decorated with valuable stones and sacred minerals. He wore a perfect turquoise around his neck, a perfect white shell over his shoulder, and a flawless agate disc upon his head. His face was marked with terrifying stripes, and he carried a basket filled with lightning bolts that served as his weapons. The trickster spirit Coyote acted as his messenger and servant. Yeitso lived near Sujil, now known as Mount Taylor in New Mexico, close to Warm Spring near present-day Grants. From there he ruled over the Anai and hunted human beings. He nearly discovered and devoured the hero twins when they were infants. According to the story, the twins' mothers saved them through quick thinking. Yulkaist-san hid the children beneath piles of sticks, while Esenat-Lei confronted the giant directly. When Yeitso demanded to know where the boys were, she denied their existence. The giant pointed to small footprints nearby and asked whose they were. Esenat-Lei calmly replied that they were her own footprints, because she became lonely and pretended she had company. To prove her claim, she pressed tiny footprints into the ground using her hand. Satisfied, Yeitso eventually wandered away. Years later, after the twins had grown into powerful warriors, they consulted their father Sanuai and prepared to destroy Yeitso. They traveled toward Sudzo to confront the giant monster. As they approached, they first heard the thunder of his footsteps long before they saw him. The legends describe the terrifying scale of Yeitso by saying his head first appeared above a distant eastern hill, then above a southern hill. Then his upper body rose over a western hill before his full form finally emerged near Sudzo itself. The giant walked to a lake and drank from it 4 times. Each time the water visibly lowered until the lake was nearly dry. Looking into the remaining water, Yeitso noticed the reflection of the twins and mocked them, calling them a pretty pair and wondering where he had been hunting that he had never seen them before. The twins and the giant exchanged insults and challenges 4 times before Yeitso attacked by throwing lightning bolts at them. The twins escaped by riding upon a rainbow, easily dodging the giant's attacks. Then their father Tsunai struck Yeitso with lightning from the sky. The twins followed this attack with 4 powerful bolts of chain lightning. The strikes shattered Yeitso's armor of flint scales into countless fragments. Mortally wounded, the giant collapsed to the ground. He struggled to rise again, but fell face first and died. After defeating him, the twins scalped Yeitso and threw his severed head toward the east, where it transformed into Cabazon Peak in New Mexico. According to the legend, the giant's blood still carried enough supernatural power to revive him if it reached the other Ane monsters. To prevent this, Nyanazgani used his knife to carve trenches and redirect the blood away from the remaining monsters. Navajo stories explain that these cuts became the volcanic ridges and cliffs that still surround Cabazon Peak today. The flint scales that once covered Yeitso's body did not go to waste. The Navajo people were said to have used them as armor, knives, and arrowheads after the giant's death. Through this story, Yeitso became not only a terrifying monster, but also part of the sacred geography and natural landscape of the American Southwest, with mountains, volcanic rock formations, and stone tools, all tied directly to his destruction in Navajo mythology. The Dark Watchers are mysterious shadow-like figures said to appear along the mountains and ridges of the Santa Lucia Mountains in California, as well as in stories connected to Mount Mingus in Tennessee and Mount Graham in Arizona. The creatures are usually described as tall, dark, human-shaped silhouettes standing motionless on distant peaks, cliffs, or ridgelines, silently observing travelers who wander through the mountains. They are most often seen during twilight, sunset, or early evening, when the light creates long shadows across the landscape. Witnesses commonly describe the Dark Watchers as tall, thin figures wearing broad-brimmed hats, cloaks, or capes. They are usually seen alone, although sometimes multiple figures appear standing across different ridges at the same time. The Watchers rarely move or interact directly with humans. Instead, they stand completely still, staring out across valleys or upward toward the sky. According to the legends, they are not openly hostile, but encountering them creates a deep feeling of unease and fear. Most stories warn that it is better not to approach them or acknowledge them directly. The origins of the Dark Watchers remain uncertain. Some stories connect them loosely to the Chumash people, who historically lived along the central California coast, though researchers have found little direct evidence of identical beings within surviving Chumash mythology. Later Spanish settlers who moved into the region reportedly saw similar figures and gave them the name Los Vigilantes Oscuros, meaning the Dark Watchers. Over time, the stories blended into local folklore surrounding the isolated coastal mountains of California. The Dark Watchers became widely known outside regional folklore through literature and poetry. Author John Steinbeck referenced them in his 1938 short story Flight from the collection The Long Valley. In the story, a young man traveling through the mountains briefly sees one of the figures standing on a barren ridge. He quickly looks away because local wisdom says the Watchers should be ignored and never approached. Steinbeck described them as mysterious beings that did not bother travelers who stayed on the trail and minded their own business. Poet Robinson Jeffers also referred to similar beings in his poem, called Such Counsels You Gave to Me. Jeffers described forms that looked human but were certainly not human, appearing silently from behind ridges to watch travelers in the twilight. In his poem, the figure eventually takes on the appearance of the observer himself before dissolving into shadow, adding a more psychological and supernatural interpretation to the legend. The legend continued into modern times through the work of Thomas Steinbeck, the son of John Steinbeck, who claimed to have personally seen the Dark Watchers during his childhood in Big Sur. Later, he collaborated with artist Benjamin Brode on a book called In Search of the Dark Watchers, which explored the folklore and included interviews with people who claimed to have encountered the figures in the mountains. One famous modern sighting occurred during the mid-1960s when a Monterey Peninsula resident and former high school principal was hiking in the Santa Lucia Mountains. During the trip, he reportedly saw a tall, dark figure standing on a rock while surveying the surrounding land. The figure appeared to wear a hat and cape. When the man called to other hikers to look at it, the figure suddenly vanished without a trace. Similar sightings continue to be reported by hikers and locals throughout the region. Unlike many monsters in folklore, the Dark Watchers are not known for attacking people. They are more often portrayed as silent observers, spirits, or unexplained entities connected to isolated wilderness and mountains. Some interpretations suggest they may be spirits tied to the land itself, while others believe the stories could be influenced by natural optical illusions caused by fog, shadows, exhaustion, and low sunlight in mountainous terrain. Despite these explanations, the consistency of the stories over generations has kept the legend alive. The Dark Watchers remain one of the most unusual legends of the American West because of their quiet and passive nature. Rather than violent monsters, they are mysterious figures that simply watch from the peaks, appearing at the edge of vision before fading back into the mountains and shadows. The Piasa Bird, also known as the bird of the evil spirit or the bird that devours men, is one of the oldest and most famous legendary creatures connected to the Mississippi River region. The creature originates from the traditions of the Illini people and was said to dwell among the towering limestone bluffs near present-day Alton, Illinois. Unlike ordinary birds or beasts, the Piasa was described as a monstrous winged predator, something closer to a dragon than any natural creature. According to the legends, it spit fire, screamed with enough force to shake the earth, and hunted human beings along the riverbanks. The creature became famous because of enormous paintings made on the limestone cliffs overlooking the Mississippi River. These murals depicted the terrifying beast in bright colors visible from passing canoes and river travelers. The original paintings eventually disappeared due to erosion and human activity, but modern recreations still exist near the area where the originals were once seen. The Piasa bird was first documented by Europeans in 1673 when French missionary Jacques Marquette and explorer Louis Joliet traveled through the Mississippi River region. Marquette described seeing two enormous painted monsters high upon the cliffs above the river. According to his account, even the bravest indigenous people feared to look directly at the creatures for very long. He described them as having antlers like a deer, glowing red eyes, a tiger-like beard, scales across their bodies, a face resembling a human, and an incredibly long tail, winding around the body before ending in a fish-like tail. The paintings were colored red, green, and black. Marquette was so impressed by the quality of the artwork that he claimed even skilled painters in France would struggle to recreate them under such difficult conditions. Native descriptions of the Piasa bird were even more terrifying. The creature's body was said to resemble a horse in size and shape, with huge wings capable of bending trees through the force of their movement. It possessed white horns like a stag, massive fangs protruding upward from its lower jaw, sharp talons, and a tail covered in spikes that wrapped around its own body several times. Flames reportedly burst from its nostrils as it flew through the sky. The scream of the creature was said to shake the ground itself, and according to legend, anyone who heard the scream was already doomed. Though massive and horrifying, the beast was also described as cunning, stealthy, and deceptive, striking suddenly from above before victims could react. But if you were paying attention to the description I just gave of the Piasa bird, then another creature should immediately come to mind: the Jersey Devil. The similarities between the two are difficult to ignore. Both creatures are described as winged beasts with horrifying screams, unnatural appearances, and the ability to fly through the night skies while terrorizing humans. Both are associated with fear, death, and remote wilderness regions, where sightings become part of local folklore for generations. The Piasa bird was described by the Illini as having a body roughly shaped like a horse, massive wings, horns like a deer, glowing eyes, sharp claws, scales, and the ability to breathe fire from its nostrils. The Jersey Devil is commonly described as having bat-like wings, hooves, horns, claws, glowing eyes, and a strange animalistic body, combining features from multiple creatures. In many sightings, witnesses describe the Jersey Devil emitting terrible screams that echo through forests and swamps, much like the earth-shaking cries associated with the Piasa bird. Some versions of the Jersey Devil legend even describe it spitting flames or breathing smoke while flying through the pine barrens. Another similarity is how both creatures seem to blur the line between bird, dragon, demon, and beast. Neither creature cleanly fits into a single category of animal. The Piasa bird was painted with scales, antlers, claws, wings, and a fish-like tail. The Jersey Devil is similarly hybridized, often described with the head of a horse or goat, leathery wings, clawed limbs, and a serpentine or twisted body structure. In both legends, the creature is not merely an animal, but something unnatural, and spiritually unsettling. The behavior of the creatures also shares similarities. Both are described as stealthy hunters that attack suddenly from above. The Piasa bird was feared for swooping down upon Illini warriors along the Mississippi River, carrying victims away before they could defend themselves. Likewise, Jersey Devil stories often describe the creature appearing without warning in isolated forests, roads, or farmlands before disappearing back into darkness just as quickly. In both cases, witnesses describe hearing the creature before seeing it, with terrifying screams serving as an omen of danger. However, despite the similarities, the origins of the two legends are drastically different. The Piasa bird originates from indigenous Illini traditions tied to the Mississippi, river bluffs, and ancient painted murals dating back centuries before widespread European settlement. The Jersey Devil legend, on the other hand, developed primarily within colonial-era folklore of New Jersey's Pine Barrens. Most versions describe the Jersey Devil as the cursed 13th child of Mother Leeds, born as a human infant before transforming into a winged monster and flying into the wilderness. The Piasa bird was treated more like a territorial predator or evil spirit, defeated through bravery and spiritual guidance, while the Jersey Devil became associated with curses, omens, witchcraft, and demonic folklore. There is also the matter of physical scale. The Piasa bird was often described as enormous, powerful enough to bend trees with the force of its wings and carry away full-grown warriors. The Jersey Devil, while certainly dangerous in legend, is usually described as smaller and more agile, often compared in size to a large man-sized creature, rather than a dragon-sized beast. This creates an interesting crossroads when examining the two legends together. It is possible the similarities are simply coincidence, separate cultures independently creating stories about winged, predatory monsters based on fears of the unknown wilderness. It is also possible that later descriptions of one creature influenced the retelling of the other, as stories spread through North America over centuries. Another theory is that both legends may stem from older archetypes, ancient fears of horned flying predators that became reshaped differently depending on the culture telling the story. Whether the Piasa bird and the Jersey Devil are connected or entirely separate creatures remains unknown. Yet the parallels are undeniable. Both remain among the most feared and visually striking monsters in American folklore, creatures said to descend from the skies with terrible screams, burning eyes, and monstrous forms that combine the features of beasts, birds, and dragons into something far more unsettling. The Piasa bird legend centers around the Illini chief Watoga, sometimes called Watoga, and his struggle to save his people from the monster. According to the story, the Illini village beside the Mississippi River had long been peaceful and prosperous. Then one morning, as young warriors prepared to fish along the river, a terrible scream echoed across the valley. The Piasa bird descended from the sky and carried away one of the braves. After that first attack, the creature returned repeatedly, snatching villagers one by one. Panic spread through the settlement as even the strongest warriors proved unable to stop the beast. Desperate to save his people, Chief Watoga turned to the Great Spirit for guidance. He fasted and prayed for nearly an entire moon cycle. Eventually, he received a vision revealing the creature's weakness. Though most of the Piasa's body was protected, the area beneath its wings remained vulnerable. Watoga gathered the tribe and prepared a trap. The warriors sharpened poisoned arrows while hiding themselves near the village. Watoga himself stood openly as bait, waiting for the creature to strike. Soon the scream of the Piasa Bird echoed once again through the air as the monster descended toward the chief. The beast seized Watoga in its talons and attempted to carry him away. However, the chief grabbed onto strong tree roots and held himself to the earth, despite the creature tearing into his flesh. As the Piasa Bird spread its wings to lift away, 6 hidden warriors emerged and fired poisoned arrows into the vulnerable flesh beneath the wings. Again and again, the creature attempted to fly while Watoga refused to release his grip. Each time more poisoned arrows struck the exposed area. Eventually the poison weakened the monster. With a final scream of agony, the Piasa Bird released Watoga and plunged from the cliffs into the Mississippi River below, disappearing forever beneath the waters. The Illini people celebrated their survival and honored Chief Watoga for his bravery. According to the legend, an artist named Terahai Onawaka painted the image of the Piasa Bird upon the bluff to commemorate the victory. From then onward, every warrior passing the painting would shoot an arrow toward it as a salute to Watoga's courage and to remember the destruction the beast once caused. Over time, these arrows and the natural erosion of the limestone gradually damaged the mural. The paintings continued attracting attention from explorers and travelers throughout later centuries. Robert de La Salle and other French explorers also reportedly saw the images. In the early 19th century, artist William Dennis created one of the first surviving sketches of the mural, labeling it the Flying Dragon. Later depictions included works by John Caspar Wilde and Swiss artist Rudolf Friedrich Kurz, who described the image as resembling a colossal eagle. The legend gained further mystery through the work of Professor John Russell in the 1830s. Fascinated by stories of the Piasa Bird, Russell searched to nearby caves and bluffs, believing they might contain the creature's nest or the remains of its victims. During his exploration, he reportedly discovered human bones and remains inside some caves near the river. His writings were later published in magazines and historical collections concerning ancient cultures of the Mississippi Valley. Though no direct proof connected the remains to the Piasa legend, the discovery strengthened local belief that something terrible may once have haunted the cliffs above the river. Today, the Piasa Bird remains one of the most iconic creatures in Midwestern folklore. The story combines elements of Native American mythology, dragon legends, spiritual warfare, and early colonial exploration. Whether interpreted as a symbolic spirit, an exaggerated memory of some unknown predator, or purely a mythological guardian of the Mississippi bluffs, the Piasa Bird continues to endure as one of North America's oldest and most haunting legendary monsters. The Sasquatch is considered by many to be the final and greatest beast of the North American wilderness. However, before understanding the legends surrounding these beings, one important distinction must be made. Sasquatch is not simply one singular creature. The term refers to an entire category of large, hairy humanoid beings, much like the word human refers to many different peoples and appearances across the world. While the name Bigfoot became the most famous popular term, many traditions and eyewitness reports describe multiple regional variations with different behaviors, appearances, and temperaments depending on where they are found. The word Sasquatch itself comes from the Ho'okomilim word Saskase, meaning wild man. The term was introduced into English in 1920 by British Columbian schoolteacher J.W. Burns, who collected stories from indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest. The modern term Bigfoot became more widely used later, due to reports of giant footprints found across North America. Yet among many researchers and believers, Sasquatch remains the more accurate and respectful term for the beings described in Native American traditions stretching back centuries. The most famous Sasquatch encounter in history occurred in 1967 near Bluff Creek in Northern California. On a fall day, Bigfoot enthusiast Roger Patterson and his companion Robert Gimlin rode horseback into the forests near Orleans, California, investigating reports of unusual footprints. During the trip, they encountered a large, hairy humanoid figure walking along a creek bed. Patterson quickly filmed the creature using a handheld camera, creating what would later become known as the Patterson-Gimlin film, the most iconic footage ever associated with Sasquatch. The creature seen in the film became known as Patty. Unlike many earlier assumptions about Bigfoot being male, Patty appeared to be female, with visible breasts and a body structure different from a human male. The footage lasts 59 seconds and shows the creature striding through the woods before briefly turning its head toward Patterson with what many describe as a look of annoyance or disgust. The figure then continued calmly into the forest without attacking or fleeing in panic. Patterson and Gimlin attempted to follow at a distance on horseback, but the creature disappeared into dense undergrowth. Later that day, they returned to make plaster casts of enormous footprints found at the site. Plans to continue searching the area were abandoned due to warnings that heavy rain might flood Bluff Creek and trap them in the wilderness. The Patterson film remains one of the most controversial pieces of footage ever recorded. Supporters argue that the creature's body proportions, muscle movement, walking style, and visible anatomical details could not have been replicated convincingly by a person in a costume during the 1960s. Some researchers point to unusual joint placement, visible muscle movement beneath the hair, and even a possible injury or tumor visible on one leg. Skeptics insist the footage is simply a man wearing a gorilla suit. Roger Patterson maintained until his death that the film was genuine, while Robert Gimlin has consistently denied involvement in any hoax. Stories of giant hairy beings in North America existed long before modern cameras or popular culture. Many Native American tribes across the continent described large human-like creatures inhabiting forests and mountains, and some cave paintings have been interpreted as depictions of Sasquatch-like beings. One of the earliest written records appeared in 1811 through explorer David Thompson while mapping regions near present-day Washington State and Canada. Thompson wrote that the Spokane people spoke of a race of hairy giants living in nearby mountains, possibly around Mount St. Helens or the Cascade Range. According to these stories, the beings stole salmon and occasionally abducted humans during the night. Thompson also documented enormous footprints measuring around 1.5 feet long, among the earliest recorded Bigfoot tracks in written history. Another famous account came from Albert Ostman, who in 1957 described an alleged encounter dating back to 1924 while prospecting for gold in British Columbia. Ostman claimed he was kidnapped during the night by a giant Sasquatch and carried deep into the wilderness. When he awoke, he found himself among a family of towering hairy beings, over 8 feet tall, with long arms and thick fur covering their bodies, except for smooth, padded feet. According to Ostman, the creatures behaved like a family group similar to modern apes, communicating and living together in a primitive but organized manner. The story resembles modern reports of primates abducting infants or intruders, though whether the account was true remains debated. Throughout North America, certain wilderness regions became especially associated with Sasquatch sightings. One such place is the Adirondack Mountains, whose dense forests and remote terrain are frequently linked to reports of towering dark fur-covered figures moving silently through the woods. Witnesses often describe powerful strides, strange vocalizations, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. For believers, the isolated and largely untouched wilderness provides an ideal habitat for an undiscovered primate species. Others interpret the sightings as folklore strengthened by fear, isolation, and imagination. Among the most dramatic Sasquatch encounters in American history is the Ape Canyon incident of 1924 near Mount St. Helens in Washington state. A group of prospectors led by Fred Beck had spent years searching for gold in the region and frequently discovered large footprints near streams and springs. While working near Ape Canyon, they began hearing strange whistles and loud thumping noises in the forest around their cabin. One day, Beck and another prospector, known under the pseudonym Hank, encountered a 7-foot-tall hairy creature hiding behind a pine tree across a ravine. Hank fired his rifle, and the creature vanished into the canyon after several shots narrowly missed it. That night, the prospectors awoke to a violent assault on their cabin. Large rocks slammed into the walls and roof, while ape-like creatures surrounded the structure. One creature reached through a hole in the cabin wall and attempted to grab an axe. Hank and Fred fired rifles while the others remained frozen in fear. The creatures reportedly quieted at times as though listening to the men inside. Hank shouted that they would leave peacefully in the morning if left alone. The attack continued until sunrise. As the prospectors escaped through the canyon, Beck claimed he shot one of the creatures, causing it to tumble hundreds of feet into the gorge below, though no body was ever recovered. Skeptics later suggested the attackers may have been pranksters from a nearby YMCA camp throwing rocks in the darkness, with fear and echoing canyon walls turning ordinary events into something terrifying. Regional variations of Sasquatch legends developed across North America, each with unique behaviors and appearances. One of the most aggressive is the Grassman of Ohio, also called the Ohio Grassman or Orange Eyes. The Grassman resembles Bigfoot, but is described as more territorial and violent. Its name comes from crude hut-like nests woven from tall grass. One of the most famous sightings occurred near Minerva, Ohio, in 1978, when children reported a giant hairy creature sitting in a gravel pit examining trash. Witnesses described it as covered in dark matted hair and weighing around 300 pounds. The creature later appeared peering through the family's kitchen window before vanishing. Investigators found strange footprints and a terrible odor lingering in the area. Soon afterward, the family's German Shepherd was discovered dead with a broken neck, leading many locals to suspect the Grassman was responsible. Among the Lakota and Dakota Sioux traditions appears another Sasquatch related being known as Chi-Tonka, meaning Big Elder Brother. Unlike purely animalistic depictions, Chi-Tonka is considered a sacred woodland spirit and messenger connected to warnings from the Creator. According to some traditions, this huge hairy being appears during times of imbalance, destruction, or spiritual corruption to remind humanity that harmony with nature has been broken. Writer Peter Matthiessen described indigenous beliefs that the being appears before great disasters or purifying destruction affecting the earth, air, water, and all living things. Reports of giant hairy figures connected to these traditions have spread from the northern plains into Alberta and the Pacific Northwest. Another feared variant is the Janasqua, also known as the stone giant or stonecoat in Iroquois legends. The Janasqua is described as a larger and far more dangerous cousin of Sasquatch, standing between 9 and 11 feet tall and weighing up to 1,000 pounds. Its skin is described as rock-hard, making it resistant to injury. Stories claim the Janasqua attacks by twisting the heads off its victims and throwing large rocks at intruders. Highly territorial and violent, it differs from many Sasquatch traditions where the creatures avoid direct confrontation with humans. In the Rocky Mountains, another regional variation known as the Sitiko or Tiatko appears in indigenous stories. These beings were described as wild, hairy forest people who hunted animals, gathered wood, and stole fish from humans. Unlike humans, they communicated through eerie whistling sounds rather than spoken language. According to legend, the whistles could enchant or lure humans, especially children. Parents warned children not to wander too deeply into the wilderness, because Sitko were believed to abduct human children and force them into servitude. Stories also warn that if a Sitko was harmed or killed, the others would remember and eventually seek revenge. One story tells of Native Americans capturing a young Sitko boy and observing him hunt deer, gather firewood, and fish during the night. Eventually, the adult Sitko return, their whistling terrifying the villagers into retreating while they reclaimed the child and vanished back into the wilderness. Across all these stories, certain themes remain consistent. Sasquatch beings are deeply tied to wilderness, isolation, mountains, forests, and the unknown spaces beyond human civilization. Some traditions portray them as spiritual guardians or messengers, while others depict them as violent territorial predators. Many indigenous stories treat them not as monsters, but as another intelligent people, living parallel to humanity in hidden places. Modern sightings continue across North America, from the Pacific Northwest forests to the swamps of the South and the mountains of the Northeast. Whether Sasquatch is an undiscovered primate species, a spiritual being, folklore born from wilderness fears, or something entirely unknown, remains one of the greatest mysteries in North American legend. Yet the stories endure because they touch something ancient within human imagination. The idea that deep in the untouched forests, there may still exist another kind of people watching silently from the trees. The final mystery moves away from creatures of the forests and mountains and into one of the strangest theories ever proposed by modern civilization, the theory of the ancient astronauts. Unlike the beasts and spirits described in older legends, the ancient astronauts are connected to questions about humanity itself, our origins, our technology, and whether intelligent beings from beyond Earth may have visited humanity in the distant past. Ancient astronaut theory proposes that advanced beings visited Earth thousands of years ago and influenced early human civilization. Depending on the version of the theory, these visitors were either extraterrestrials, advanced ancient humans, future humans using time travel, or forgotten civilizations possessing technology far beyond what historians currently believe existed at the time. The theory became widely known through the work of Erich von Däniken, a Swiss author who published the book Chariots of the Gods in 1968. In the book, von Däniken argued that many ancient structures Carvings, myths, and works of art could only be explained through contact with technologically advanced visitors from space. He questioned how ancient societies could have created massive structures and precise engineering projects without modern tools, proposing that outside assistance may have guided or taught humanity long ago. One example frequently connected to the theory is the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous geometric shapes and figures carved into the desert floor that are only fully visible from the sky. Ancient astronaut supporters argue these designs may have been intended for beings capable of flight or space travel. Critics counter that the Nazca people created the lines using simple surveying methods and that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial involvement. Ancient astronaut believers also point toward ancient cave paintings, sculptures, carvings, and religious descriptions from cultures across the world. Some artworks are interpreted as depicting figures wearing helmets, breathing apparatuses, or strange suits resembling modern astronauts. Objects such as the Japanese Dogu figurines, unusual carvings from Mesoamerica, and descriptions found in ancient religious texts are often presented as evidence. One of the most famous examples frequently discussed is the vision of Ezekiel from the Hebrew Bible. Some believers interpret Ezekiel's descriptions of wheels within wheels, shining metal, fire, and beings descending from the sky as a description of an advanced spacecraft rather than a spiritual vision. These interpretations became highly influential within ancient astronaut literature and modern UFO culture. Massive ancient construction sites are also commonly tied to the theory. Structures such as the Great Pyramid of Giza, Poma Punku, Stonehenge, and other megalithic sites are frequently claimed by theorists to be too advanced for the civilizations that built them. Archaeologists strongly reject these claims, pointing to extensive evidence showing how ancient peoples constructed such monuments using human labor, mathematics, engineering, and long periods of organized work. In the late 20th century, the theory became dramatically more popular through the television series Ancient Aliens. The program introduced millions of viewers to the idea that aliens may have influenced ancient history. The series expanded the theory far beyond von Däniken's original ideas, connecting nearly every unexplained artifact, mythological figure, or ancient monument to extraterrestrial involvement. Critics accused the show of promoting pseudoscience and ignoring established archaeology, while supporters argued it encouraged people to question accepted history. Over time, several major variations of the ancient astronaut theory developed. Some believe the astronauts were not aliens at all, but advanced ancient humans who mastered space travel long before recorded history. Others believe they were future humans traveling backward through time. Another variation suggests humanity itself originated somewhere else in space before arriving on Earth in prehistoric times. The most popular version remains the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the belief that alien visitors directly interacted with early civilizations. These ideas became the foundation for several UFO-based religious movements and conspiracy-driven belief systems. One example is Antravis, a Polish movement combining ancient astronaut ideas with racist and anti-Semitic mythology. In Antravis' teachings, humanity descended from two alien races, Slavs from the planet Atlanta and Hebrews from the planet Hebro. The movement framed this mythology around conspiratorial racial beliefs. Another example is Inglism, a Russian religious movement promoting the idea that ancient Aryo-Slavs descended from spacefaring ancestors brought civilization to Earth, Though separate from Antravis, the mythology shares many similarities, including battles against hostile gray aliens and the belief that advanced cosmic ancestors created early civilization. Both movements became associated with extremist nationalist ideologies and pseudo-historical claims. Supporters of the ancient astronaut theory often argue that ancient people recorded encounters with advanced beings using the only language and symbolism they understood at the time. According to this interpretation, gods descending from the sky, flying chariots, glowing beings, or divine weapons described in ancient myths were actually misunderstood forms of advanced technology. Skeptics counter that this interpretation strips ancient cultures of their accomplishments and assumes early civilizations could not create sophisticated engineering, astronomy, or art without outside help. No verified sightings of ancient astronauts exist in modern times. According to the theory itself, most encounters would have occurred in the distant past, when humanity was less technologically developed. This creates one of the major debates surrounding the theory. If the visitors were truly advanced humans from Earth, many argue there should still be traces, records, or continued sightings. If they were alien visitors who eventually departed, the lack of modern evidence becomes easier for believers to explain. Despite criticism from historians, archaeologists, and scientists, the ancient astronaut theory remains deeply influential in popular culture. It exists at the crossroads of mythology, science fiction, conspiracy theory, religion, and humanity's fascination with the unknown. Whether viewed as a misunderstood interpretation of ancient history or as evidence of contact with something beyond Earth, the theory continues to captivate people because it asks one of humanity's oldest questions, whether we have always truly been alone.